Hey everybody, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Shed Organics Show. This episode, we are joined by Paul Jones from Elements of Creation. And Paul and I met at the Queensland Garden Show this year. He had a bit of a stall there and was talking on one of the stages to do with things around food security, wicking beds, and ways of growing healthy food yourself at home and really maximizing what we're doing and making the most of some of the technologies that are out there, including these wicking bed systems. So we go into wicking beds today a lot and their ability to help you grow healthy food, to keep the soil healthy and the plants in the optimal moisture range. But we also touch on tiny homes and Paul's ability to create and manufacture spaces for clients and for people about using tiny homes and spaces that and more minimalist in their approach, but also really connected in their design, in their creative design, as we talk about, to integrate this indoor-outdoor space and this ability to have somewhat of a mobile dwelling that you can then take around and live in and really enjoy a minimal, connected, natural lifestyle. So this was really fascinating for me. I find a lot of inspiration in the tiny house movement and seeing so many of these creative places come to fruition. So talking to somebody who's heavily involved with that was very exciting for me. So all things tiny homes and all things wicking systems. We're in for an absolute treat with this conversation. So without further ado, this is Paul Jones from Elements of Creation.
What inspired Elements of Creation, I guess, was coming from a background of being in the construction industry. We had a window company that we'd built up over 20 years with architectural joinery, and it was really seeing the government regulation and the building codes and the effects that they were having on the cost of building materials and building a house. And funny enough, with our factory, I would be out there at the beach collecting driftwood and bringing it back and building furniture on the side because I love timber. And I came to the point where I wanted to really pursue what I was passionate about and create something that didn't have to be a just a small box that someone lived in as far as a tiny house, but it could be something very creative, artistic, and almost like something that was luxurious because it's a small footprint. I could put the extra quality into it to make it feel quite luxurious, as well as opening it up with doors to an outdoor greened space. And it really is combining those two elements, whether it's a house with timber and steel or stone to plants and nature, and tying those two in is really what creates the feel and the privacy that could be anywhere, and it could be in a suburban setting, it could be in a rural setting. But so yeah, that was what my passion sort of started, and it's like everything, it's sort of one thing leads to another, and it's evolved. So
Yeah, that's so right. And I love how you've done the reclaiming of timber and materials because, as you say, it's crazy how much material we're bringing in new these days all the time, and houses are going down, and like people are taking houses down, and what happens to some of the materials there that are actually still in good condition, some of these older looking designs and things that you can then give a little bit of a sand down and a repaint or a stain and it looks incredible, looks just as new, and you can create these things out of reclaimed stuff. Is that the excitement for you as well?
absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of these old materials have got a story to them, and they don't necessarily have to be old buildings. They could just be dead trees that have still got good timber on them, or different types of materials that have come from different places that have a story to them. Um, so there's so many aspects that can actually make it a completely different experience to using. some of these new materials, and some of these new materials, some of the chemicals and things that are in them is something that concerns me. And if you buy a new car, you can kind of smell, in a hot sunny day, some of the plastics that are coming out of these
Mm.
uh, things. So yeah, being really aware of the chemicals, and I guess with the building industry, they're trying to keep costs down, so they're trying to find cheaper ways to manufacture things. And whenever you're trying to do that, there's always the danger that you're going to compromise,
Mhm.
and that's my concern. And yeah,
I feel like that's exactly right because they are going for a cheaper way. It's not built to last anymore. These are, they're using different types of woods that are going to break down. They're not using these hard woods that will just last forever and ever and go through the effort to make something that's long lasting and impressionable for a long time. Do you,
correct.
well, like my wife and I stay in really like to stay in a lot of these types of kind of places where you've got someone set up a little tiny home or it's a reclaimed old building or it's a shipping container that's been modified or something like this where it's got this really quirky feel, but it's also very homely and it's very contained in its experience, you know what I mean? There's everything that you need,
Sure.
but on a small scale and done in a really quaint way in terms of its design. And it's we're not going for these modern looking things necessarily. We're always going for something that just has a bit of character. And I feel like that kind of word, character, is something that really sums up a lot of the projects that you do. Is that something that you're aiming for?
It is absolutely, and I used to do photography, and black and white used to be quite interesting for people to look at because it was just painting with light basically.
Yeah.
So it wasn't what you don't see in black and white, but when you see something different, so anything where you're seeing someone's creativity come to life is interesting to humans. It's because they're seeing a human has created something which is unique and different. A little bit the opposite to AI, I guess.
Yeah.
And the more we see technology and AI, the more people I think, are going to want to crave creativity. Yeah,
Are you a creative person? Is this your
I
creative
am.
outlet?
I think we all are. I actually think we all are. I think the schooling system actually slowly tries to take that out of us, but
Mhm.
that's something that I think I'm quite passionate about is actually inspiring the next generation to tap into their creativity because they are more gifted than they actually realize. And
Mm.
yeah, and it just means having a go.
You're right. And I'll relate this to music because that's something I understand is that a lot of people tell me or are quick to tell me that they don't have a musical bone in their body and they wish they could be creative. And I tend to share your idea on that, where I sort of say, I believe everyone has creativity because I would say to them, oh, okay, you are a chef or you're a blah, 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 whatever it is. And I said there are elements, or I'm using this word now, the elements of creation in what you do in your job and in your career. So there are ways of being creative even in a non-creative job or avenue. So people are finding that in a lot of different ways, but you're now able to use your creativity to create these projects for people and create wonderful spaces and things like that. Um, so are you sourcing everything from start to finish? So if I like, what are clients coming to you with most of the time? And what's a sort of a general middle of the road average job for you that you're undertaking in that regard?
So yeah, so that has sort of changed. But so I was manufacturing timber joinery as well as aluminium, and there's still a degree of creativity in that because I could work with a client with a design or a concept to open up an entertaining area to the outside in a way that they may not have thought about.
Yeah.
So so I'll be manufacturing new products, but my passion has really come to the point where I actually need to focus on what I'm passionate about creating
Hmm.
and then putting it out there and finding someone who wants it. So, for example, I came to the realization that I just need to go and build the ultimate tiny house that I would love to live in
Yeah.
and take it to the tiny house expo. And sure enough, there will be someone who goes, "Wow, I'm willing to pay,
Yeah.
money to buy that because that's unique and I've never seen it before." So I think sometimes we can get caught up in the fear of, oh, I've got to find someone who wants to commission me to do something. But I actually believe that just pursue what you're passionate about and you'll find someone who wants that. And to some degree, there's a freedom because you're not having to be constrained with what somebody else wants. You're really pursuing what you like and what you're good at. And ultimately that will be worth more than anything else, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. You're almost like what that made me think of straight away is that when you're talking to someone initially and saying, "Look, I can create you your dream tiny home or whatever it might be," we're thinking in the theory. We're thinking in ideas, and there's not something physical and tangible in front of people. But if it's like almost saying, "Oh, I will paint you an artwork," and you'll like, what do you kind of want it to be like? There's no, you can't see it at the end. But if someone says, "Hey, look, this is my artwork," someone will go, "Wow, that's amazing," and they'll, be really interested because they can see that vision
Yes.
in real life. Um, are you then finding that people want to come and take what you've created and you're replicating, or you're trying to just do something similar and make modifications to then what their desires are as well?
Yeah, so we had a lot of interest when we built the last couple of tiny houses, and it made me realize, well, how can we do this more effectively, where people do have some choice about how they, maybe have the interior finished off without losing ourselves in what we're gifted at creating. So
Hmm.
I guess offering people a series of different, styles
Yeah,
and keeping it simple to those styles. And they can also add some of their own creativity, to some finishes.
yeah,
But yeah, being careful not to get too caught up in chasing what someone else wants and losing ourselves in that because, you know, money can sometimes, cause us to compromise what our values are or what we're trying to achieve. And there's a
mm,
balance. I think there's a balance between um, uh, how can we help people and how can we stay within our creative gifting and do that well. So a bit like with running podcasts, I guess, is that you set the format of how this is run and what you would like to talk about and giving a bit of freedom to the other person to add their story. Yeah.
yeah. I see. So you're sort of sharing that, but you're giving them a little bit of creative license to kind of have some ideas, but you're setting the framework. Um, do you think that that's dictated sometimes by the materials as well, or something that you're trying to feature in particular? And is there anything that's like stands out to you as something that you've really had to work hard on trying to, build something around?
Yes. So the most obvious thought comes to mind is we had a small staircase going to
Oh,
the bedroom in a tiny house, and we it was an unusual staircase in the sense that how do we make this safe with a handrail without taking away that kind of creativity and so we thought, well, I'll find a limb off a tree, a branch that sort of suits that shape, and that's where your creativity really gets, stretched. So, you're out there looking for a good quality piece of a good species of timber that's not going to split or
mm,
crack. And finding an old limb that has been dead for a long time is already seasoned. So you've
yeah,
got a piece of wood that's seasoned, and it's amazing. This old piece of wood that's in the bush, the moment you clean it up and you sand it and you polish it and oil it, it comes to life. And then
yeah,
you make some steel stanchions to hold it and secure it so it's strong. And you've got something that actually has got such a wow factor that it's almost the thing that sells the tiny house, so that's how valuable your creativity is. Yeah.
Yeah, and it must be so difficult because nature doesn't really do straight lines, does it? Or so how are you trying to work, and is every job so different because of the different angles and curvature of all these different timbers and things, or
Yeah, so most of the work that I do with building is using new materials
yeah.
and then creating something unique or artistic from that using. But where you add that touch of artistic or curved, the moment you curve something, it adds a dimension of interest to it straight
Mm,
away. And so I think that's where tiny houses really lend themselves to the ability to explore that creativity because you're not under the same building codes as a house. And so you've got a whole lot more creative license
mm,
without making it dangerous, but it's just you've got a whole lot more freedom. And so, yeah.
and just to double click on that, just to get a little bit of clarity for myself and maybe for others, is what do you mean by the fact that you're not under the same constraints? Can you talk a little bit about just the basics in the building codes between a fixed standalone house versus what these tiny homes are classified under?
Yeah, so a tiny house would be class if it's on wheels, would be classified under a caravan. It's been a bit
Wow.
of a difficult process for councils because they don't move particularly quickly and changing with the times. So
Mm,
they're trying to play catch up to figure out how they can regulate. Councils love to
they
regulate
do.
things, but how they can regulate a new industry. And the tiny house industry has taken off so quickly
Mm,
and evolved so quickly that and the beauty about and the reason why it's taken off is because people have got that creative license to be able to create something. So you're not constrained for example, on the head height to a bathroom. So for a tiny house, the overall height of a tiny house to transport on a road is a certain height. And if you take the standard head height of a house and made it two-story, it wouldn't fit within that. But you can have a bathroom that's just above a fairly tall person's head
yeah.
and it's still quite functional, but it wouldn't meet the building codes. So there's lots of little things like that. For example, the hand railing I did on the staircase, it
Yeah.
wouldn't meet building codes in a house because of the height of the stair treads
Mm,
to go up to. So you're working with a small footprint, so you need to be able to step up those stairs to get to a second level. You don't want to take up as a lot of a footprint and
mm.
livable space. So you're thinking outside the box and how you can do that, and it's making it interesting. It may not be the most user-friendly staircase for elderly people, but for young people, it's a bit of fun. Kids love
Yeah,
it.
I bet they do, and it is fun. It feels like a bit of a like a little playground almost at some stage. But do you find that like this could be very similar with houses in terms of the creativity used, but do you feel like the regulations are killing a bit of the creativity? And are they do you see that happening with the tiny home industry as well?
Yes, so it's interesting because the Queensland government had a body of different tiny house builders that they brought together to try to come up with um, a series of codes that would sort of regulate to some degree the tiny house industry, which I guess is good that they're involving the builders of tiny houses to come up with
Certainly.
those solutions. Um, the danger is that it starts becoming over-regulated
Yeah.
again, and then and stifles that. And there's a lot of fear around, tiny houses because of people hear stories of councils. But the reality is that most people within council are trying to find ways for their kids to live or looking for other forms of kind of accommodation. So I've had many people within councils talk to me about how they could do something on their property.
Yeah.
So,
What
yeah.
do you think it is about the tiny home that's so desirable at the moment? Is it something like a move to simplicity? Is it the affordability? Is it a bit of, well, probably a bit of everything?
I think it's a bit of everything, and I think that the younger generation, you might be able to speak to this more than me, but they don't want to be tied to a huge mortgage,
Hmm.
and they want freedom. They want to be able to travel. They want to be able to do things. And I think the tiny house gives the ability to have a huge amount of freedom, financial freedom, not to be locked into a mortgage. You can still buy a block of land and have a much a much better lifestyle with a block of land and a tiny house off grid. And the other significant difference with a tiny house is that with technology today and with solar and with composting toilets, you can locate that tiny house anywhere in a
Mm.
beautiful setting by a creek, by a river. And in the event of a extreme weather event like a flood, you can relocate it out of that zone. And a classic example is Byron Bay recently, a few years ago, saw that flooding and apparently there was a mass exodus of tiny houses that you saw on the highway as this happened, and that can't be done with obviously permanent dwellings. So
That's a
yeah,
really good point. I didn't even really think about that, but it does make it so mobile and it's off grid, obviously, most of the time, isn't it? Because you can't be plugged into the whole system if you're not following the regulations. That's what I understand, at least.
yeah,
Is that
that's
right?
right.
Yeah. So,
Correct. That's right.
yeah, okay. And then the time, yeah. So just to add my 2 cents to that, I feel like every person doesn't want to be tied to a large mortgage, and recently saw this thing. I don't know whether you saw it as well, but it came up and it was a clip from the 1950s of interviewing this fella in Brisbane, I think it was. And he had a family of 6 kids, him and his wife, and they bought a house for $9,000, and it was like a house for all of them for 8 people. Nothing like
Yeah.
massive, but it was a $9,000 house, and he was on a 80,000. I think he was a fairly well off gentleman at the time. $80,000 a year income, and that's
Wow.
just like that. That's crazy to think that in that time frame. I know it's been roughly sort of 50, 60 years since then, but we're now looking at least 10 times our yearly income for a house. And that's not necessarily going to get you anything crazy special these days. You might even be looking at a one-bedroom apartment in somewhere outside the city for that kind of price. And we're facing this difficulty as younger generations. It's the hardest it's ever been to be able to fully secure your own piece of property and land because of that gap. Um, so I feel like this tiny home revolution, or almost, is exactly that, a bit of a revolution against this housing affordability and the the capitalist, materialist style lifestyle of just having so many things and needing so many things and being connected to everything. Um, is that, are you finding that more and more people are just wanting to get rid of all of this craziness and go back to that simplicity in a tiny home space?
Absolutely. It's actually been quite significant since COVID actually. And I was involved with tiny houses before COVID, but I think COVID was a real wake-up call for so many people on so many levels. And it's funny because I'm down in New South Wales now, and I was in Queensland and on the Gold Coast there. But since I've been down New South Wales and just doing some building work in Sydney and talking to people, um, the number of people that sold up and moved and bought some acreage or just moved out of Sydney where they and came to a rural area. I think people instinctively felt that when things go pear-shaped, you don't want to be in a city. You want to be somewhere where you can be a little bit more self-sufficient.
Hmm.
And I guess living off-grid, tiny houses, permaculture, all that sort of thing is something that's appealing to a lot more people. And although they may not fully know how to do it, there's certainly a big shift demographically to put yourself in a position where you can start to learn how to do this. So yeah,
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. So that's that's only one sort of element of the creation that you bring to people's lifestyle. So tell me about now the other parts around the tiny house. So you're not only setting up the home itself, but you're, as you mentioned and alluded to earlier, trying to create this experience, this place where you've got this connection between the simplicity of the tiny home, but also nature and being outdoors. How are you thinking about trying to connect your tiny home to the outdoors, and what are some of the techniques and things that you're using to really open that up?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jordan. So when I first started tiny houses, I was conscious that I wanted to be able to grow some veggies, but my challenge was is how do I grow? Because I was traveling quite a lot, and I was thinking how can I look after these veggies because I know that you've got to keep watering them. So, and I came across a guy who had actually developed a system, an Australian guy who developed a system. He was sort of into permaculture, and he'd developed something that would make it easier to be able to do this. And I sort of got onto that thinking, well, this is going to be perfect for tiny houses, and I could do it in a way where I can transport the gardens along with the tiny house, you know. So
Yeah.
that's how I got started. And I was thinking it was all about just saving water when I started, but there's so much around living off grid and being connected to nature and creating the tiny house or the any living space where it's opened and it's open plan to that nature um, just brings it all together and it creates the it does I think the outdoors and the plants and the ecosystem you create around the tiny house has more to do with the feel that you're creating than anything else. Yeah.
And you almost, what I've found is that anytime staying in a tiny house of sorts, you, it becomes part of your living space, doesn't it? That outdoor area. And if it's somewhat open plan where you kind of just open the doors up and then you've got this bit of a courtyard or some seating area and some gardens, it feels like it's not so tiny anymore. It's this connected indoor outdoor space. And I presume that's quite deliberate.
Yeah, it absolutely. And it's funny because I've got a bit of a passion for the bush and camping and things like that. And whenever we're feeling stressed, we want to go into nature. We want to go into a forest, go for a
Hmm.
bushwalk. And there's something about being immersed in nature which induces this calm uh, emotion or feeling. And you might have a really stressful day, but you go and sit in this beautiful setting, garden setting, where you're surrounded by food, and it's something that feels just and there's a feeling of security as well. You've got food around you, um, so there's a whole lot around that, and yeah.
Yeah, the feel of just being able to walk out there and see all of these flourishing vegetables. Was that the the thought trying to bring those two things together, the worlds of tiny homes and then the worlds of gardening and eating your fresh produce and things like this? Is that why the focus on things like kitchen gardens and that with the tiny homes?
Yeah. So when I first started homes, I I met Faye, who started the Tiny House Expo, and we got chatting. And she's right into permaculture as well, and we were just chatting about the problems of affordability of homes and about lots of things with the next generation of
Yeah.
kids. And she made a comment which really struck me, and it stuck with me. And she said, if we can teach people to build their own homes and grow their own food, the security, the personal um, satisfaction and security that comes from being able to do those two things,
Hmm.
you're no longer bound by, and I think there's a lot of fear out there. The next generation are fearful of things that are happening around the world, but we're actually in control of a lot more than we realize. And when we take that control, there's a whole another level of satisfaction and fulfillment that comes from that. So yeah.
It really does. And then it's often said that when you're basic needs are met, you then have the capacity to go and think about other people and the world and how you might contribute to that. When it's when you're worried about a roof over your head or food on the table, you don't have time to think about the health of the soil or the blah blah blah, like all of these other things that we want to try and help. But when you've got the security of knowing that you've got a roof over your head that you then can fix or build or move or whatever you need to do, as well as the gardens that you can grow and supply food and water and all of this, you then have time to think about solving the world's problems and turning your sort of worries to the world and seeing how you can help and contribute, which I think is a really important thing that you're alluding to there. Um, let's move into that sort of space with the gardens now. And what gardens are you focusing on creating for people, not just in tiny homes, but in general? And I'll give you a bit of context into what how I'm thinking with this, because specifically, we met each other at the Queensland Garden Show, which people will be able to go and see the little vlog. I had a little bit of you in there, um, and you were showcasing a lot of these wicking bed style garden beds and designs. And I'm not sure whether they're the ones that you can see behind you or not, whether they're yours or not. But they're the hey guys, really quickly jumping in. I just want to remind you, if you are not subscribed to this show, that is the number one thing that you can do to show me your support. So if you're finding value from this conversation and you're deeply engaged, I would love you to hit the follow or subscribe button. All right, back to the show. These systems are very beautiful. They're very nice looking garden beds and things, and they do have this ability to have this wicking system inbuilt in them, right? So can you talk to me about the wicking system in general, why you like it, and why you think that it's a good choice? I mean, you alluded to it a little bit before about the saving water and the convenience of moving it and things, but can you refer to a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, Jordan. And I can tell just by watching some of your previous podcasts that you're really passionate about soil and building soil biology.
Correct.
And when I first got involved with the gardens, I thought it was about saving water, and it is. It saves about 85% of the water using different types of wicking systems. But the real the real revelation for me personally, I was going on a bit of a regenerative farming um, uh, focus where I was really being quite passionate about building soil biology and the importance of biology. And when I got involved in the wicking system, I started to meet lots of people in permaculture and syntropic farming and all sorts of different spaces, and just private individuals which were uh, really passionate about building soil biology and explaining so much about it. And then I started watching YouTube videos around the world of people that are just doing amazing things around this. And I thought, wow, there was something that really resonated with me, and it made me realize that again, going back to COVID, the health of our planet really comes down to the soil biology. And in fact, to fix our environmental problem, the answer is literally in our soil. It is
Mm,
that simple. And
yep.
the mental health problems that we have, the answer's in our soil. It's actually in the garden. And all these solutions are right there. And I think so many people are seeing all these problems, but we need to be focusing on solutions because we can turn all these problems around incredibly quickly just with soil. So I really got involved with the wicking system to I was in the building industry and could make good money in the building industry. So to go to gardening, I'm like, there's not a lot of money to be made here for me because I don't know a lot about gardening. A bit like maybe some other people that have started, but I thought, well, I'm passionate about it. I'm going to do this anyway, and it really didn't happen because of the money. It was more because I was just really passionate about growing healthy food and being a pastry chef by trade. I understood that flavor is directly related to nutrient density, and my passion was, well, how can I make something so nutrient dense that the flavors are so great that the food will taste amazing. So that was sort of part of my passion, and But the as I've gone down this path of and it's nothing new. I mean, a wicking system is basically using capillary action, and which is the movement of water up through soil, and it's a bit like a kerosene lantern where you've got oil moving up that wick.
Yes.
It's a wicking system, and but what I had come to discover is that lots of people have been doing wicking in the past using gravel and geofabric, and or pipes, irrigation pipes under the gravel, but I was coming to realize that there was lots of inherent problems with the way people were doing it and how they were doing it, and different people would get different results. Initially, most people would get really good results from their wicking beds, and Sophie Thompson was probably one of the biggest
Hmm.
advocates for wicking beds on Gardening Australia, and she would talk about the same thing, as people would get great results, but then over time there would be problems and things like anaerobic problems where the soil was starting to go acidic,
Hmm.
plants were starting to die. And so that was why um, uh, they developed these commercial type wicking systems. And the one I'm particularly interested in is the WaterUps
Hmm.
system, which is an Australian made product. It was designed and manufactured here from recycled plastic. And the guy who designed, invented it, a guy called Vince. He started a property up near Byron Bay, and he, again, like me, he was just passionate about showing people how you can use this to change your growing, how to grow food easier than ever before. And part of that is, I thought it was all about saving water, but in actual fact, it was actually more to do with providing consistent moisture to the soil biology that you've already built. So
Hmm.
you've created some really good compost. Well, any if you've got a handful of compost, it's like you've got a handful of uh, billions of living microbes, and I think a plate of soil has got more microbes than there are human beings on Earth, and
Yeah.
there's a lot more going on in the soil than we realize. So that living anything living needs oxygen and water to thrive and to grow. So a wicking system provides consistent moisture where that biology can multiply. And what happens is it tends to break down the organic matter in the soil a lot quicker, which is turning to nutrients, which is feeding the plants, which is the reason why you're getting sort of 50, 60, sometimes 70% healthier plant growth
Mm.
from a wicking system. So this was developed to provide perfect drainage, so you don't get root bound. Roots don't work their way through the gravel and become root bound. It's wicking from the very bottom of the wicking cells. So there's no gravel in there. It's all holding a lot more water. And funny enough, one of the biggest concerns for people when we started um, was will the water eventually sort of become anaerobic? How is it going to drain? Will it become root bound? So the difference between what we're doing with a commercial wicking system is that it's got an air layer, so the roots will not grow in midair,
No.
and they air prune themselves. So it's
Yeah.
the horticultural process called air pruning, and so
Yeah.
I actually recently just dug out a tree that was 3 years inside a big wicking planter, and I'm putting it into the ground, and I filmed underneath, and it was
Wow.
clean as a whistle. There was no sediment, so we don't use geofabric. And it was actually Arno King, who speaks at the Queensland Garden Expo, who
Yeah.
who who told me that they've just discovered that geofabric actually becomes water impervious over a period of time as the sand and the sediment blocks up those pores.
Mm.
So by not having any geofabric, you allow that perfect drainage, and with the small holes in the bottom of the wicking cell, you don't actually get very minimal material falls through those holes, so it's not enough to cause it to go anaerobic.
That's
So
really
yeah,
clever because that is really important, that exchange of the carbon dioxide and the oxygen coming through the soil. Um, and right, there's so many interesting points that you just said that I want to touch on. I've trialed a few different automatic watering systems, everything from sort of drip irrigation to sort of wicking systems, and then like automatic water sources where they basically have the saucer and it kind of just sits in the water and it will keep pumping into that and things like this. But I've found various different problems, like you say, with the different methods. What I like about the wicking system, and maybe you can talk to your thoughts on this a little bit, is that it gives the plant the option of having clean water without any nutrients in it versus any water that's coming through the soil layer and picking up some of the nutrients from the compost or the mulch layer and things like this. Because I very much work with trying to mimic the natural systems that we see, right? And in a forest floor system, you've got the mulch layer that's breaking down and coming down into the soil, and then you've got all the biology in the soil breaking that down, making it plant available. And as you rightly say, with the correct amount of oxygen and water in there. Now, there's often these what do you call it? Deposits of groundwater in nice and deep, where the roots are able to reach right down and access that clean water. But then they're also getting rainwater that comes through the top and does that natural cycle of coming and bringing it all through the top. So if the plant wants clean water, it can access it. And if it wants nutrients, it sends up the sort of feeder roots up towards the surface to collect some of that nutrient filled compost and things. Are you finding that if you went specifically wicking system only and you had just water underneath, are you finding that the plant misses out on anything from not having that top down watering, or are you trying to have a bit of both, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. You've described it in a different way to what I've heard most of the time, but that's you've made a good point. And there's so much around this wicking. We're still learning so much about it, and and WaterUps and a guy called Eric Sturman who's horticulturist, used to be North Sydney's horticulturist. He is doing research, and there is so much that we don't understand, but we're learning more and more about what's possible and pushing the boundaries of. So what we do know is that the wicking system is mimicking very much what's happening along a creek bed
Hmm.
or along a gully. So if you look in nature, on top of the hills, generally the nutrients or the organic matter has tended to wash away, and it tends to accumulate in the valleys,
Right.
and you get a lot of green, lush green grasses
Hmm.
and plants growing, and these are almost sort of dry creek beds that hold moisture under the ground, but in rain conditions they would be carrying a lot of water through there. In the same sense, a wicking system is a similar thing. So when, as you're building soil biology in your garden bed, when it rains, that nutrients is tending to wash through and then stays inside that reservoir. But a traditional
Right.
garden would be a lot of that would be washing away. To give you an example, I'm owner building a house at the moment, and we're on a sloping land, and underneath is solid bedrock, and there's about 300 mils of clay, and then we've got topsoil and a reasonable amount of sort of organic matter on top, but a lot of it has over the years washed away.
Hmm.
But as I've done a cut in for the house back to the bedrock, the just in the last few months with the rain we've been having, I'm seeing all the really nutrient-rich water coming out of the organic matter up higher up on the hill, coming across the rock, and it's literally like um, green water coming down and algae forming in puddles because that's
Wow.
so nutrient rich, and that's been washed, generally washed away. When it's the moment you break the ground and you start doing earthworks, there's major problems with nutrients washing away and organic matter washing
Mm.
away, and that's what's causing a lot of the problems with flooding is the way we've done agriculture. So basically, the wicking system is capturing that water and it's preventing it from washing away. So in the same way that they use swales to slow the water down and slow the movement off your land and try to hold it longer to be able to soak into the
Yeah.
organic matter. Um, this is sort of speeding up the whole process and allowing more holding capacity of water. So
Mm.
it's just so in the same way that electric fences first started, I was reading an article about the inventors of electric fencing and the challenge they had in convincing people this is a better way to go because it was after the war and everyone sort of had already had wire fencing in posts, and why would we want electric fencing? Well, there's some benefits to electric fencing. You can move it around. You can contain animals in a way that you could never contain them before. But it took a long time because people thought they were going to get
Yeah.
electrocuted, and so there was in the same way there's lots of sort of skepticism about these wicking systems. And recently, Angus Stewart, who's a celebrity gardener, he was the guy before
Yes.
Costa. He grows kangaroo paws in Tasmania, and he's one of the world's leading, growers and developers of
Wow.
new, types of kangaroo paws. And he uses our wicking system for all his growing. And he
Really?
wrote a book. Yeah, he wrote a book called Future Proof Your Garden, and it was all about climate change and the extreme weather events and how to mitigate all those extremes. And that's basically what a wicking system does in a nutshell. It takes away all the fluctuations. And as you were saying before, a drip system, for example, when you have a drip system, that drip, if you look at the profile of the soil underneath the drip system, you end up with a column of moisture, and
Mm.
around and outside of that is quite dry. So traditionally with a garden, it's very hard to tell how much moisture is actually in that soil without digging down and feeling it. Or it may be a case of you seeing the tree starting to wilt, which means it's too late. The tree's already in shock. So how do you prevent that? Well, a wicking system takes away all those fluctuations and it allows you to start to monitor how much that tree is drinking, when it's drinking, the seasons when it's not drinking at all, and you can actually allow that reservoir to become depleted and you don't need to worry about it. But it's creating an environment where that plant can get as much water or as little water as it wants, as you say, as it needs it.
Mm.
And all of a sudden you become quite in tune to what that plant's doing, how much it's drinking, when it's drinking. And I was recently talking to one of the reps from Rocky Point Mulching, and
Yeah.
that they were. I was at a event in Roma, and she was telling me that the self or the fertilizing uh, little beads that we put on around our plants and citrus plants, they as it rains they wash away and they wash nutrients. A wicking system works differently. So we're not watering from above. So you're getting less mildew, you're getting less mold, and you're actually that moisture is coming from underneath. So the soil off the surface of the soil tends to be drier. You get less weeds because there is less moisture. You get less mildew, and so what you were saying is those complaintive type beads that release nutrients, their casing is actually made of plastic, and in many cases it's got PFAS in it, and
Yeah, I bet. Mm.
they don't break down. So these things are being added to our soils, but if we just build healthy soil, we don't need to focus on these things as much.
Mm.
And yeah,
I'm a big advocate for that, Paul. And thank you for explaining that because that gives me a lot more perspective. And I hadn't really thought about how it's capturing what's washed through. So you're getting some of the leaching of these minerals that you normally would lose, and then they're therefore going to be in the water there and accessible. And I loved how you said you get to know the plant as well and what it drink when it's drinking, when its requirements are heavier than others because it's this ideal moisture zone that we're trying to keep the plant in. And I've found that obviously if you have big swings in the climate and the temperature or big dry downs and then, you know, completely saturated with a lot of rain, it puts the plants under so much stress. So they're having this consistent moisture range is a lot better for the stress of the plant and therefore for your crops and your food, right? So um
absolutely, yeah.
I want to touch on something that you mentioned before because you mentioned swales, right? And you'd mentioned to me the other day that you are trialing something with a wicking system and swales. Can you run me through a little bit of that and the thinking behind that? Because that's so intriguing.
Yeah, and it was for several years I was doing shows and expos and telling people about how good, the system is and maybe having a few pots there to show them. And often people think, he's just trying to sell me something. What's
Yeah.
he trying to sell me now?
Mm.
And I came to the realization, what? I need to stop telling people, how good it is and just show them.
Yeah.
So I'm
Mm.
actually starting a food forest down here in New South Wales,
Awesome.
and I'm passionate about doing it in a way which shows people how they can establish that food forest in a fraction of the time it would normally take. And I know there's a lot of interest in people wanting to set up a food forest or on a small scale in a backyard. So what I've done is taken the permaculture principles of swales and taken it to the point of let's do swales, but let's do them on steroids. So let's put the wicking underneath the swales and have the ability to when that swale fills up with water, we can drain that swale into the wicking reservoir to capture that water to extend the period of time that it actually soaks up into the soil.
Wow.
As well as that, I've got a dam, and I've been talking to Arno King about aquatic plants and actually creating a floating raft, a wicking raft
Whoa.
for edible aquatics, and then having the ability to feed that water through the wicking system in really dry periods where we don't have a lot of rain, but the dam, stocking the dam with fish, the nutrients from that water, feeding
Oh,
it
that's
through the,
neat.
the, the wicking system. So yeah, funny enough, so this sort of came about talking to Stocklands. So we were doing some of the community gardens at Stocklands up in Budrum, the over 55s villages, and
Cool.
one of their biggest challenges is they don't have enough space for water tanks. So
Mm.
all all the residents, a lot of them are elderly people that love gardening, but they're having to pay water and they're using town water, which has got chlorine in it. So we were talking about how to set up um, some of these developments with the wicking system under the ground. So as a way of mitigating the runoff from the roads that, around the houses, that they, rather than have to drain it all into a lake or into a waterway, that they can feed all these, all the roof gutters, everything into the under garden wicking system as a way of
Wow.
storing that rainwater, which is great for your garden, and minimizing the need to irrigate plants. So there's
That's
no limit to
incredible.
what you can do. It's just the only limit is our imagination. And so I'm trying to demonstrate that here. And I've been growing fruit trees. I'm passionate about bush tucker and
Cool.
so I've been growing fruit trees for the last 4 years in the wicking pots, and then I've planted them onto large planters in some cases, and now I'm just starting to put them into the ground with the wicking system. So they've had a full life from a grafted tree to a fully grown fruiting tree with the wicking, and so yeah, it's interesting. And I'm not a expert gardener in any way, but it's using the wicking system makes me look like I'm a bigger gardener. So it's good.
It's taken away some of the obstacles that a lot of people face, isn't it? But
It is. Yeah.
I love this idea of having it under the ground and the repurposing, and then the fish in the dam that are feeding and bringing almost like all of these different areas of hydroponics and all of these things all together in one thing. What does it look like under the swale system? Like, what's the wicking system actually built like under these
Yeah.
swales?
So that's a really good point. So I started out thinking I was going to do long rows with the wicking system, but it's I've come to realize that for cost purposes and for just for practicality, it's better to focus on putting the wicking underneath the main fruit trees or the main trees that I'm trying to establish that
Yeah.
would tend to dry out or wouldn't do well in a drought. And so with a swale in permaculture, you've got the hollow and then you've got the mound where you're
Mm.
growing the trees on, and it's you're chopping and dropping and creating organic matter along those mounds. So I'm mounting I'm placing the wicking systems underneath the trees, and I'm looking at connecting those via irrigation
Yeah.
pipes. Um, just purely for refilling those reservoirs in a drought where I needed to actually fill them, and with the ability to automate it in some way. And this is all comes back down to labor intensity of irrigating and so yeah, um there's different things I'm trying, and I'm starting to film it and sort of capture what I'm doing so that it I can refer back to it later on. We see, the results, what worked better than others. So it's a bit of an experiment at the same time.
Yeah, it seems fun though because you're trialing stuff and just trying basically throwing things at the wall, being creative and seeing what is going to work and have things run off. So are you then digging down quite a is this prep done before the swale prep is done or in the same process and this kind of thing?
So yeah, that's another really good point you've made there. So we've got bedrock about sort of 600 down. So obviously it can't be lower than that. But in reality, you don't need a lot of depth. Like most plants, like for example, veggies, 200 mil of soil depth is all they need
Mm,
to grow. Fruit trees, probably 600. Most of the roots of trees are actually on the surface in the
yeah.
organic layer. They're not particularly deep. We've had some massive big blue gums fall over just recently in a big storm, and again, their root systems are
It's
significantly shallow
so
compared to what you
shallow.
would think.
Mm,
Yeah, so
mm,
they don't need to be particularly deep. So I'm saving my back and not digging particularly deep holes. I'm actually tending just to go below the surface and then building with organic matter above to keep
mm.
them mounded and to provide good drainage. So we're on a sloping block, so the ability to drain each terrace or each swale into the other, and then even to have at the bottom some sort of tank system to capture any nutrients that does escape that system to be able to pump it back to the top. The goal is to stop any water running off our property is the ultimate goal,
Yeah.
because that is a significant challenge when anyone is building on a sloping block, even in a suburban setting. It was just recently I was at a garden show up in Roma and talking to a woman who she had had some earthwork done in her backyard because she had major problems with water just sitting in her backyard and coming from next door and then just sitting in a big pool. And so she dug a big sump, and she just realized, being at the show, we were talking about this little channel of wicking system that she could actually put along the fence line where she could have a nice garden, and then all that water would actually drain off the path into the wicking system, irrigate her plants, and any excess could run into that sump, and then with the sump pump be pumped back up to a dedicated tank for nutrient water, basically for a
Wow.
garden. So yeah, yeah.
That's really clever. I do have a little bit of an issue with that myself, with some of the neighboring blocks being slightly higher than an area in the back of our garden, so it tends to have some water sitting. And even though that's not particularly an area that I'm going to be changing into a garden, to be honest, but it gives you some ideas, some repurposing, and the extremes in weather that we see, especially up here in Queensland, where we've got one moment we can just be having inundated full of rain, and then we're going without rain for such a long time, and then there's like the cyclones and all of these things. Um, we're we're reusing and recycling our resources in a very effective way, and it's going to save you money on your fertilizers. It's going to save you money on water. It's going to save you time. It's going to protect your crops and all of these things. There's so many upsides to it. Um, if you had to, if you kind of had to give people a little bit of an intro, maybe not an intro, a couple of things that people need to think about when they're getting a wicking system, or even just a few scenarios in which you see wicking systems being really useful. We spoke about a couple of those being the initial sort of backyard setting where they've got something they can grow in these nice planter boxes that are all set up very nicely. Um, we spoke about, maybe going something like you're doing with the under the swales and actually doing some earthworks and reservoirs and things like this. I've seen giant like Oya like situations as well where they've got these clay or terracotta reservoirs where all of the irrigation is going, and that's a similar thing where it's sort of wicking out of the side of that, and the roots are attaching around that. But
Yeah.
what are some common things that you hear people talking about with wicking systems when they're setting up, and what can you offer people advice on in their journey starting to jump into wicking beds?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a really good question. So one of the biggest questions we get is what sort of soil do we use?
Okay.
Um,
Hmm.
and basically the answer is whatever soil you would normally use for that plant that you're growing. And with with the main focus on organic matter. So if they were going to start out for the first time and just have a little wicking set up on their balcony, I would strongly recommend learning about composting because your kitchen waste is can be turned into gold,
Hmm.
literally soil gold. And with a little worm farm, one of the easiest ways to do it, and one of the most effective ways have seen is just putting a little in soil composting pot into the into the soil. And it could be just an old plant pot that you bury and put a lid
Mm.
on top so rats can't get into it, and just start throwing your green waste into that soil directly, and it will save you having to make a compost pile and then add it to the soil. If you've got a busy lifestyle, that's the easiest way to dispose of your your green waste, but it's going to directly feed your plants, and the worms will get in there. Even if there's no worms in to start with, they will find a way into that garden because
Yes.
they have this innate ability to find food, and because of the wicking system, it will provide consistent moisture. One of the problems with composting is they dry out.
Hmm.
Well, with the wicking, it will keep that organic matter and that food damp, which will break down. Now, some people are worried about flies and things like that. Well, if you cover it with carbon and some mulch or some leaf, just some brown leaf litter from around the place, it'll soak up that moisture and stop the smell. So yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Paul, because you're right. The quality of the soil, the potting mix, the starting medium that you're using very much dictates its ability to wick properly, hold moisture properly, and give access to nutrients and things like this. I often find myself talking to people about the ingredients used in certain potting mixes and how, for example, looking into the ingredients, where they're sourced from, and the makeup of that particular potting mix or soil, because it might be using 90% like wood chip, it might be using lots of things like, composted chicken manure or various different things that have these different water holding capacities or nutrient profiles, and obviously the sterilization that goes through, the contamination and all of these different things. They say it's approved for organic use when often it's not, and it doesn't come from organic sources and all of these things. But that's a whole another rabbit hole. But do you find that making the wrong choice, or starting out right by really thinking about the quality of the ingredients in your soil, you're therefore going to get a much better result long term with the wicking system?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the mistakes I made in the beginning is I didn't know a lot about gardening when I started, and I had a wicking system. I thought, oh, it's the key to all my problems. So not realizing that if I start with bad soil, no magical wicking system is going to improve that soil. You need to have good soil. And it's funny, going on this whole journey has made me realize that the whole commercial soil industry, like our food industry, is very much regulated. And unfortunately, our potting mixes and things like that all have some things in them that we may not realize. And one of them is in Queensland is the fire ant problem.
Yeah.
As a result, there's regulation that says they have to, put chemicals in there to kill or get, kill living
Mhm.
things like, fire ants. Well, we don't want to kill. We want
Yeah.
we want everything to be living in our soil. So you really have to. You can start with something, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to build it and add up and add to it to create as much diversity in the soil as you possibly can. And but that's a whole nother podcast right
Yeah,
there.
I totally agree with that. It's such a good point to leave. leave people thinking about. But just one last thing that I'd love from you, mate, is what's your top of mind thinking at the moment in terms of where you're keen to be moving and talking about? What's something that you're passionate about at the moment that you're hoping to sort of bring more light to?
Yeah, so creating resilient communities is something that I'm quite passionate about. Resilient, creative communities, I might add,
Love
and
it.
um, I think there's going to be a big shift towards people wanting to be a part of a community that is around food security and creative building practices. I guess a bit like the Amish, but I'm not talking about a commune or anything, but I am talking about people becoming more aware that they need to be connected to farmers, to communities that are growing, like yourself, teaching, educating. And I think people will be amazed when they do start to get immersed in that, how much there's a world that they didn't realize was there that they would probably really enjoy if they took the step of faith just to try it. A community garden is a great place to start. Just getting into a community garden, the people you will meet from all different walks of life that have some amazing knowledge about natural systems, and it's yeah. So yeah, being involved in that.
Very, very cool, mate. Well, I share that too. I think that's a wonderful thing that you're doing. There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Fascinating conversation with Paul, and I think you'll agree he is really seriously doing some cool things and spreading awareness, but also showcasing what can be done with a little bit of creativity and a little bit of thought. And I'm really grateful to Paul for sharing some of these. And I would love to get him back on to dive a little bit further into some of these learnings and teachings that we touched on today, because there are so many different rabbit holes and conversations that could have come off this. So if you'd like to see Paul back, let me know in the comment section below. Go and hit up Paul. His links will be in the description. You can go and say g'day, and you can go and say that you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, sharing this episode around with your friends, tagging me on your stories if you're listening to it is always fun. I love seeing where people are listening from. And a review, as always, helps people find the show. So I'd be forever grateful if you could do that. Otherwise, look, that's it from me. I'm looking very much forward to another episode each and every week. So sit tight, enjoy your gardens, and get out there in the sunshine, get your hands in the soil, and live a happy and healthy life. We'll see you very soon next week on the very next episode. Bye for now.